here we have inductor, and here we have other inductors. You can never find an inductor connected to the ground. Never. Why? Because always the inductor is connected to the power rail, as you can see. The inductor, we have 19 volt in the inductor, because inductor is just a wire, like a fuse. You can never find a fuse, for example, connected to the ground. Never. Hi, this is a very important video where I will teach you how to diagnose and repair any dead laptop motherboard just by following the steps that I'm going to show you. So let's get started. So this is the article. Basically, here we have the topics that we will be discussing in this course, all these topics. Okay, so we're gonna see a very important informations in this article. I'm going to give you many tips and tricks on how to detect a failed in any dead laptop motherboard. We're gonna discuss, of course, those schematics. You're going to learn how to read schematic and how to solve any problem. I'm going to show you how to use ceramic capacitors in order to be sure if the IC is bad or not. Okay, so this is basically the article that we're gonna see step by step. We're gonna discuss, of course, about the BIOS, how to program the BIOS, connectors, the motherboard components. We're gonna also see the 3 volt power rail, 3 volt and 5 volt, all voltages. So we're gonna discuss about 1.8 volt, 1.5 volt for the RAM, how to use the multimeter. Okay, of course, this is the BIOS that we're gonna discuss in detail, etc. So let's get started. So let's take a look to topics that we will be discussing in this course. So we're gonna see what is the dead motherboard. So what is the cause of dead laptop motherboard? We're gonna see also how to check a laptop motherboard visually without multimeter, how to diagnose a dead laptop motherboard, how to check for a short circuit in the motherboard, how to check motherboard ports and connectors, how to check laptop motherboard power jack serviceability using, of course, the schematic, how to check motherboard power circuit and component serviceability, laptop motherboard chips and integrated circuits. We're gonna see also how to check super input output IC or SIO and its circuit, how to check the BIOS or basic input output system, how to test fuses using a digital multimeter, how to test inductors, capacitors, diodes, MOSFETs, ICs, and motherboard chips using a digital multimeter, how to check SMD components or surface mounted device components on a laptop motherboard, how to check motherboard connector serviceability, how to use the multimeter in the correct way, and much more. So what is a dead motherboard? So basically, a dead laptop motherboard is a 100% failed motherboard that cannot be powered on even if you press the power button. So even if you press the power button, nothing happens in the laptop. Means the motherboard is dead. No power, no data. So when you plug the adapter and press the power button and you got no response and no need was eliminated, means the laptop is dead. Okay, so as you can see here, this is the adapter in. You should, of course, confirm that you plug the adapter, you press the power button, and the laptop won't turn on. No response and no lights or laptop LEDs means the laptop motherboard or the laptop is a dead laptop. Okay, so what is the cause of a dead laptop motherboard? So here in this section we're gonna see the causes of a dead laptop motherboard. So there are many reasons that can cause a dead laptop motherboard. The first cause, a short circuit. Okay, as you can see, if you have a short circuit in any component in the motherboard, the short circuit is the frequent fault that can cause a dead laptop motherboard. So if you have any short short circuit means there is a trouble in the power in the motherboard. Automatically the motherboard will be a dead motherboard. So the second cause, failed power jack. So also can cause a dead motherboard failure due to dry soldering or broken pins inside the power jack. The motherboard can stop working definitely. Of course, the power jack is one of the most important components that you should always check if you do a diagnostic in your laptop motherboard, because this is the input of power. Okay, the first gate, this is the gate from outside world to the motherboard. If you have any problem with the power jack, means the power will not get into the motherboard. That's why you should always check the soldering and the pinout of this power jack. Okay, so the third cause, a blown fuse near the power jack within the charge IC circuit, okay, can cause also a dead motherboard. So of course, if you have any blown SMD fuse or even diode in the charge IC circuit, means no power in the motherboard. Automatically the motherboard will be a dead motherboard. Okay, so always pay attention to the beginning of the motherboard near to the power jack. Okay, in the charge circuit you should always check fuses, diodes, inductors, etc. Okay, so pictures below shows the components that can cause dead motherboard failure. So as you can see here, this is basically the motherboard power jack. Here we have two images, schematics. This is the power jack here in this image, and over here we have the power jack, as you can see. Okay, so we have 19 volt here in pin number 1 and pin number 2. Okay, so this 19 volt will pass directly through this inductor, and then we will get here the plus V adapter 19 volt. Okay, so if you have any problem with the DC jack, for example, we will not get here 19 volt, or even the inductor or ceramic capacitors, you will not get 19 volt here. Means the motherboard will be a dead motherboard. So for this image here, as you can see, the same working principle, but here we have two inductors, as you can see. Okay, so after these two inductors you will get a 19 volt here plus V adapter. Okay, if you have any problem with these inductors, or even just one inductor, or these ceramic capacitors, means you will not get 19 volt here. Okay, so the components that can cause this motherboard failure, you can find inductor, double inductor like this, fuse, MOSFET, double MOSFET, fuse resistor, or diode. So for fuse resistor, this is basically a fuse resistor. This is a fuse resistor where we find 0 above it. Sometimes instead of the fuse, you can find one or more inductors that have the same purpose as the fuse, protection of other circuits in the motherboard. You can also find one MOSFET or two MOSFETs switches. So as you can see here in this picture, we have here the motherboard power jack, as you can see, and here this is basically the DC in. It will pass through this MOSFET. Okay, through this MOSFET. Here we have the drain. Okay, this is the drain, and here we have the source. Okay, and here of course we have another diode here that connect between drain and source. So in normal conditions, when this MOSFET is activated, when it receives the control signal here in its gate, the 19 volt, as you can see, here we have a 19 volt from V in, from the adapter, it will pass through this switch, and we will get here 19 volt. Okay, so you can have just one switch or two switches. The same working principle here also. The 19 volt will pass through this switch and then through the switch, and we will get here 19 volt. But if you have any failed switch here, this for example, or this, or even this, you will not get any voltage here. automatically the motherboard will be a dead motherboard. You should replace the switch with another switch with the same reference, and then you will solve the problem. So the fourth cause is failed super input output, or SIO. The SIO also can cause a failed and dead motherboard because it is the first responsible for the whole power in the motherboard. Note that you can check the serviceability of the SIO IC using three methods. So how we can check the serviceability of Super IO? So we have three methods. So the first method, by checking its head, you can just put your finger above the SIO IC. If you feel that the IC is very hot, it means automatically the IC is shorted, is bad. By checking its head, plug the power adapter. This is the method. Plug the power adapter and check the Super IO body using your finger. If you feel that the IC is very hot, which means it is failed. So the second method, by checking the ceramic or picofarad capacitors near to the IC. Those capacitors, as you can see, those capacitors near the IC. So if you check these capacitors and you find any shorted capacitor here, means automatically the IC is shorted. So let's continue. So by checking the ceramic or picofarad capacitors near to the IC, if you find that any of that capacitor is shorted, means 100% that the SIO IC is damaged. You should replace it with another one with the same reference. So if you have here any shorted capacitor around the SIO, means the IC is bad. You know why? Because always, as you can see, the ceramic capacitor is connected to the IC. As you can see, all ceramic capacitors here are connected to the IC in one side and to the ground in the other side. So you can never find a shorted ceramic capacitors unless you have a shorted IC. That's why if you have any ceramic capacitor here failed, the IC automatically will be failed. So the third method, by checking the inputs and outputs of the SIO IC using its datasheet. So as you can see here, this is basically the super input output IC. So the third method is to use the datasheet of this IC and then check inputs and outputs. Check, for example, VIN. Do you get 19 volt in VIN? You should check enable signal 3 volt. All inputs and outputs of the IC. But this three method is not easy. So you can just use the first method to check the heat of the IC, and the second method, the ceramic capacitors around the IC. So there are many types of Super IO. Note that the SIO is usually in square shape. You will find always the SIO in this form, as you observe in the picture below. Always you will find the SIO in this shape, and you will find, of course, this is a very common SIO ITE and ANA. So the fifth cause, failed basic input-output system, or BIOS. So failed BIOS can cause a dead computer motherboard. When the firmware inside it becomes corrupted, the motherboard will stop working. So as you can see, the BIOS contains inside it a software, or a firmware. So when that software becomes corrupted, the motherboard will stop working because the BIOS is the first responsible of the post or power on self-test, and the computer cannot turn on without the self-test. So the first step for the operating system be uploaded is the post, the power on self-test. So The chip that is responsible to do this post is the BIOS, and if the BIOS is failed, no post will be happen, and then the computer will stop working. So the 8-pin BIOS chip is the most chip used in the laptop motherboard, of course. This is basically, this kind of BIOS is a very common BIOS, okay? 8-pin BIOS. So basically, here we have its data sheet, as you can see. So basically here, as you can see, this is its data sheet. As you can see, its model here, the model of this BIOS here is SST25LF08, okay? So it seems that this is a 1 mega BIOS, because we have here 8 means a 1 mega BIOS. If you have here 16 means 2 mega, and so on. Okay, so we have the first pin here, we have CE. This is basically the output. Here we have the write protect. This is the VSS. Always the pin number 4 for the BIOS is connected to the ground. We have VSS. This is the VDD. Always the pin number 8 is connected to the 3 volt. Okay, so here we have input. This is the clock. This is the halt, and the VDD, as we told you before, connected to 3 volts. So you can check if the BIOS is powered or not by checking the pin number 8. Without powering up your laptop, you can find 3 volt in pin number 8 of the BIOS. Okay, so note, when you encountered a failed BIOS chip, corrupted firmware, you should program or flash it with appropriate firmware using the BIOS program. So basically here, so the solution for a corrupted software or a corrupted BIOS is easy. Just you can use the programmer, like this programmer or even this programmer, okay, and reprogram the BIOS IC using another software, a good software. Okay, so we have the programmer here. Basically, this programmer, you should, using this programmer, basically you should remove the BIOS from the motherboard and then connect it here in this support, and then connect this support to this programmer, and then reprogram it using, of course, the computer. That this programmer, you can find all these programs on Amazon, for example. This programmer, basically, you can just connect it to the USB, as you can see, to the laptop via this USB, and then connect this support, as you can see here, directly to the motherboard without desoldering the BIOS, and then you can program it directly from the motherboard. Okay, so the 6th cause is also a very common fault, is damaged connectors. So damaged connectors can cause also a dead motherboard. That's why you should always check the connectors when you get a dead or any other failed motherboard. So always you should do a visual inspection and check before going to troubleshoot or do anything or remove components or something like that in the motherboard. You should always do a visual inspection and check all motherboard connectors, especially USB connectors, because if you have, for example, any bended pin here or 2 pins touched together, you will get a short circuit, and then the motherboard will be a dead motherboard. Of course, also you should check the CRT connector, the DVI connector, the printer connector. Basically, this is an old connector, the HDMI connector, audio connectors, etc. Okay, you should do a visual inspection and check all connectors. So now let's see how to diagnose a dead laptop motherboard. So to diagnose the laptop motherboard, you should check the following parts in order: the laptop adapter first, then the power jack, so then the presence of please V battery about 19 volts in the motherboard. So if you have any power jack, bad power jack or bad adapter, you will not get this 19 volts. Okay, in the motherboard. Of course, this 19 volts, if we go here So let's see the first circuit here, for example. Let's see the other. Here we have the power jack, as you can see. This is the power jack, okay? So you can just go here, check these two pins here. Normally you should get 19 volt, and also after the inductor here we have the V adapter or V battery, no problem. You should find here 19 volt, or for this schematic find here 19 volt. So you should check the presence of plus V adapter or V bat about 19 volt in the motherboard, okay? And then check the 3 volt and 5 volt power system. After the V adapter, the power will goes directly to the 3 volt 5 volt power system. This is a very important power for motherboard. You can check using the multimeter these two voltages without powering up to the laptop. Then you should check the 3 volt in the pin number 8 of the BIOS. As I told you before, the pin number 8 of the BIOS, you should get 3 volts. If you don't get 3 volt in the pin number 8 of the BIOS, means there is a problem in the power. If you find that all these voltages are good, then you should program or flash the BIOS chip to solve the problem. So of course, before flashing the BIOS, you should check whether you have these voltages. If you have all these voltages and the motherboard still a dead motherboard, you should then program the BIOS. So how to check for a short circuit in the motherboard? This is really a very important information. It's really a secret. So the secret is the inductor. This is the secret. This inductor are the secret that you can use to find any shorts in a very short time. So how? I will show you how. So as you can see, this is basically inductors or coils. So inductors or coils are never connected to the ground. So these coils in laptop motherboard and even computer motherboard can never ever connect it to the ground. Never. Always the inductors exist in the power rail. Okay? In the power rail. If we go here, for example, to this schematic, so let's see the first schematics here. As you can see here, here, as you can see. Because just like a wire, okay, as you can see. So here also we have inductors connected to the power rail to 19 volt. That's why if you find that an inductor is connected to the ground, means automatically the short circuit is in that circuit where that inductor belongs to it. In every motherboard, the inductor or coil can never ever be connected to the ground. Always the inductor in the computer or laptop motherboard is connected to the power rail. So if you find any inductor that is connected to the ground, means you have a short circuit in the circuit that the inductor belongs to it. Let's take a look to the schematic of some circuit of laptop motherboard. So let's now see why the inductor is not connected to the ground. For example, here we have 3 volt power rail. Here we have the 3 volt power rail, as you can see. Here we have inductor. So inductor connected to 3 volt power rail. Basically, this is the pad. We can see this is a test point where you can check whether you have 3 volt or not. Do you see the inductor? So the inductor is connected to 3 volt here and connected to this chemical capacitor and this ceramic capacitor, and then those components connected to the ground. So let's check another power rail. We have here 5 volt power rail, as you can see. Here we have 5 volt power rail connected to the inductor. Okay, so the inductor, you will find here 5 volt and here 5 volt. Okay, you can never find an inductor connected to the ground. Here, for example, we have 1.8 volt for the RAM. Okay, so here we have 1.8 volt. So the 1.8 volt basically is generated by these two MOSFETs and an IC here. We have normally an IC here. Here we have the V battery. Basically, we have here 19 volt that will pass through these MOSFETs and then through this MOSFET, and 1.8 volt will be generated here and will pass through the inductor and through this part, and we will get 1.8 volt. So to test this 1.8 volt, you can just test it here in this part. This is at this point or in one of these terminals of the inductor. So you can find here 1.8 volt, 1.8 volt. So the inductor can never be connected to the ground. If you find, for example, that this inductor is connected to the ground, means automatically we have a short circuit. Maybe this MOSFET, because this MOSFET is connected to the ground here. Maybe this capacitor, or this capacitor, or this capacitor, etc. Okay? So let's check another schematic. Here basically we have 1.5 volt power rail. So the 1.5 volt is generated by this MOSFETs, and we have of course an IC. So the 1.5 volt will pass through the inductor. So we will get here 1.5 volt, 1.5 volt, 1.5 volt, 1.5 volt. Also here you can check 1.5 volts, as you can see. If for example this inductor is shorted, means automatically we have a short here, not the inductor. Why? Because inductor is just a wire. Maybe this can be shorted, or this, or even this. Okay, so this is why you should use always inductors to check for a short circuit. How to troubleshoot the short circuit? Put the multimeter to the buzzer or continuity option, as you can see here. To check for a short circuit, you should use the multimeter, of course, and choose the buzzer or the continuity option, and check all inductors, basically all inductors in the motherboard. All inductors should not give to you a low resistance to the ground. If you find an inductor that is connected to the ground, means automatically you have a short circuit. Then you should check the component around that inductor. 6. Let's now see how to check the BIOS. The BIOS, or basic input-output system, is one of the most important ICs in the motherboard, because it contains firmware or a program or software that is responsible for the post or power on self-test. The post is the first operation that should be performed before downloading the operating system. The post has as a purpose to check and make a self-test to the hardware parts. That's why if that firmware is corrupted, the post cannot be performed, so the laptop will not work, definitely. So to check the BIOS, you should first connect the power adapter to the power jack of the laptop, and then check whether you have 3.3 volt in pin number 8 of the BIOS without turning on the laptop. If you find that 3.3 volt is present, means you should program the BIOS to start the program. But if you don't find 3.3 volt, then you should troubleshoot it. You have problem with the 3.3 volt. You should troubleshoot it from the power jack until the BIOS. Okay, so basically this is the BIOS that we have seen before. So here we have pin number 8, we have VCC. You should find always 3.3 volt here. In pin number 6, when the laptop is on, you can find 1.5 volt. This is the clock basically. And right protect 3.3 volt. So basically this is the BIOS pin out. So the pin number 1. So we have chip select input here. So DO means data output. WP means the right protect input. This is the ground, or the VSS, the 4th pin. So the 5th pin we have input output, data input. Okay, and for the 6th pin we have, as you can see, the serial clock input. Here we have the hold input, and here the VCC, the power supply for the BIOS.